or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Dave Payne, and for the next hour, I will be reading from the February 28th issues of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, we'll begin an article entitled Nome. Actually, we're going to start with what's news. Just overall, what's happening in the world, business and finance. A summary of different articles. Okay, under business and finance, the federal government will stop working with the AI company Anthropic, Trump said, making a dramatic escalation of the government's clash with the company. Also, officials at multiple federal agencies have raised concerns about the safety and reliability of Musk's XAI AI tools in recent months. NVIDIA plans to unravel a new processor specially tailored to help OpenAI and other customers build faster, more efficient tools, a move that is poised to reset the AI race. Also, OpenAI said it has secured commitments totaling $110 billion in new funding. Also, Target said it would carry only cereals made without certified synthetic colors at its stores, citing sales data. Trump's media company is in discussion to spin off businesses, including social media platform Truth Social. OPEC and its allies meet Sunday to decide whether to add barrels to the market or continue holding back. The S&P 500 and NASDAQ fell in February, each suffering their worst month since tariff turmoil last spring, while the Dow rose 0.2%. And a chorus of concerns about AI and risky lending has bank investors spooked. Okay. So now for the worldwide summary of news. DHS Secretary Nome for months failed to appropriately respond to findings of an internal watchdog that allowing passengers to keep their shoes on during airport screening is creating significant security risk, according to documents reviewed by the Wall Street Journal and officials familiar with the matter. Also, former President Clinton said in a deposition before a Republican-led House committee that he wasn't aware of the crimes that Jeffrey Epstein was committing. Also, the Federal Reserve is waging a behind-closed-doors legal challenge to subpoenas issued in the criminal probe into Chair Jerome Powell. The Pentagon said it shot down a seemingly threatening drone near Texas-Mexico border Thursday, prompting aviation officials to expand flight restrictions. And UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer's gripe in power took another blow after the Green Party won a special election. The Argentine Senate approved President Javier Milei's sweeping free market overhaul of country's labor laws. And the U.S. intensified military preparations for a possible war with Iran as the aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. Ford approached the region. And as we're aware, we have actually started bombing Iran at this point. And unfortunate note, Neil Sedaka, age 86, a singer-songwriter, has died. Okay, we'll go on to our first full article. Nome cited for security risks at airports. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem for months failed to appropriately respond to findings of an internal watchdog that one of her biggest changes to airport security, allowing passengers to pass through screening checkpoints with their shoes on, is creating significant security risks, according to a letter from the Inspector General reviewed by the Wall Street Journal and officials familiar with the matter. In July, she announced the change with great fanfare, granting the shoes-on policies to passengers even if they weren't enrolled in the Transportation Secretary Administration's pre-check program. The announcement to eliminate what millions of travelers view as a nuisance was one of Noem's most politically popular moves to date, but a classified November report by the Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General, the agency's top watchdog, found that some of the TSA body scanners and most airline passengers pass through can't scan shoes, according to people familiar with the report's contents. The report determined Noem's policy move had inadvertently created a new security vulnerability in the system. Some White House officials have been made aware of the report. When the Secretary's office was briefed on the report, they gave it a higher level of classification and blocked it from being publicly released. People familiar with the matter said. A spokeswoman for the department disputed the Inspector General's claims and said Noem had appropriately responded to the findings. Many Homeland Security officials said Noem's handling of the Inspector General report is part of the pattern of incidents in which she has ignored or played down national security concerns. In another instance, her office published photos of a secret government facility, publicizing a site meant to house the president in emergencies, officials said. Officials across the department have repeatedly complained that Noem prioritizes her public image and political standing in a way that jeopardizes the core mission of her sprawling department. In recent weeks, DHS has come under scrutiny following 2 shootings of U.S. citizens by immigration agents. The Journal detailed recently how Noem has attempted to burnish her personal stardom, staging a headline-grabbing immigration crackdown while retaliating against rivals and dissenters. After the Journal story, senior DHS officials threatened to stop paying for the security detail for White House border czar Tom Homan, a rival, and Noem has had polygraph tests administered to DHS staff, according to people familiar with the matter. A DHS spokeswoman said the recommendations made in the Inspector General's report had already been implemented, and the department is confident in its security approach. The decision to end the shoes-off policy the spokeswoman said, was made after 1,000 tests and risk assessments, including those under the Biden administration. As of February 17th, the Inspector General told congressional committees in a letter that neither DHS nor TSA had responded to repeat requests to address the issue, including a reminder on December 10th that the agency was required by law to develop a plan to fix the problems by January 30th, the end of a 3-month window after the report was issued. In the letter, which was reviewed by the Wall Street Journal, the Inspector General said the office made Nome first aware of the problem on August 26. Quote, "I am writing to make you, the chairs and ranking members of the committees with primary jurisdiction over the Transportation Security Agency, aware of an unresolved oversight matter with significant safety and security implications for the traveling public. My office has advanced this issue as far as we are able, yet the findings and recommendations have not been addressed despite our best efforts," unquote, the February 17th letter said. The Inspector General said in the letter that they had issued, quote, 4 recommendations for corrective action, unquote, and the TSA has not engaged with the office to resolve concerns. The department spokeswoman said DHS had responded to the Inspector General's concerns. The report was shared with some lawmakers and needs the Secretary's permission to be shared with more lawmakers, according to people familiar with the matter. Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois, the ranking Democrat on the subcommittee that in part oversees TSA, is demanding more information. The DHS spokeswoman said a broad bipartisan group of lawmakers and staff have access to the report and were briefed by TSA officials in November. Meanwhile, Nome's shoes-on policy remains in effect. The old shoes-off rule was instituted nearly 20 years ago after Richard Reed attempted to detonate an explosive hidden in a shoe. White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt said Trump continues to have full confidence in Nome. Quote, "Our homeland is undoubtedly safer today than it was when the president took office last year," unquote, she said. The Inspector General's office said it had conducted covert tests on the airport screeners and couldn't comment on the substance of its findings because they were classified. In another national security-related incident early in Nome's time at DHS, the Secretary asked staff to plan a trip to Mount Weather, the federal government's secret bunker that is managed by FEMA and falls under her purview. The existence of the bomb shelter isn't classified, but government officials usually don't publicize it, and there are strict restrictions around revealing information related to it, including photos. The facility is where the president is supposed to be relocated in case of catastrophic events, with the bunker serving as the headquarters for the government's continuity operations. In April, Nome landed at the facility in a helicopter and received a tour, with her staff taking photos throughout, including aerial shots of her journey. The photos were then posted on social media channels and publicized in a DHS press release. It would have been a fireable offense for a federal employee to take such photos and post them without rarely given authorization, according to government statutes and officials. Dan O'Connor, Chief Security Officer at the Federal Emergency Management Agency, said in a statement provided by DHS that the images were reviewed in advance by officials responsible for security at the site. Quote, "There was no breach of security," unquote, he said. Democrats are now withholding funding for her department in exchange for new guardrails on how U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers are allowed to operate. Many, including some Republicans, have also called for Trump to fire Noem or for her impeachment. President Trump has stood by Noem so far, though many advisors are pressing him to remove her from her position. Despite recent scrutiny, Noem and her top advisor, Corey Lewandowski, have also doubled down on their management style, taking retaliatory action against several officials they accused of divulging information about them. Following the journal's detailed reporting on the chaos at their department, Noem and Lewandowski threatened to stop footing the bill for White House border czar Tom Homan's personal security detail, provided to him by DHS's investigative arm, Homeland Security Investigations, according to people familiar with the matter. Since taking office, Noem has been in a battle with Homan for power and influence inside the administration. Homan, who has said he has received death threats, has a detail that cost the department $500,000 a month. The White House was forced to step in to keep Homan's detail in place, the people said. Homan didn't respond to several requests for comment. The DHS spokeswoman denied they took action against Homan. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Our next article is entitled New NVIDIA Chip Aims to Speed AI Work. Amid pressure from rivals, it will offer new product for rapid processing of queries. This article is written by Berber Jin, Robbie Wellen, and Kate Clark. NVIDIA plans to unveil a new processor specially tailored to help OpenAI and other customers build faster, more efficient tools, a major shakeup to its business that is poised to reset the AI race. The company is designing a new system for so-called, quote, inference, unquote, computing, a form of processing that allows AI models to respond to queries, according to people familiar with the plans. The new platform, set to be revealed at NVIDIA's GTC Developer Conference in San Jose, California in March, will incorporate a chip designed by the startup Groq, the people said. Inference computing has been the subject of intense industry competition. Rivals Google and Amazon have designed chips that compete with NVIDIA's flagship systems, and the explosion of autonomous coding in the tech workforce has created demand for new chips that can more efficiently handle complex AI-related tasks. OpenAI has agreed to become one of the largest customers of the new processor, some of the people said, representing a major win for NVIDIA. The ChatGPT maker, which is one of NVIDIA's largest customers, has spent the past few months shopping for more efficient alternatives to NVIDIA's chips and signed a deal with a chip startup in January that provides it with new options. Earlier Friday, OpenAI alluded to the new processor when it announced it would sign up for a major purchase of, quote, dedicated inference capacity, unquote, from NVIDIA, alongside a $30 billion investment from the chip giant. NVIDIA has dominated the business of designing and selling GPUs, graphic processing units, a type of processor that can perform billions of simple tasks simultaneously. But for the first time since the start of the AI boom, it is confronting the limits of its flagship product. As the market shifts toward inference, NVIDIA is feeling pressure from some customers to produce chips that can more efficiently power AI applications. The chip giant's powerful Hopper, Blackwell, and Rubin series GPUs are considered the best in class for training gigantic AI models and command top prices. NVIDIA Chief Executive Jensen Huang has long claimed that NVIDIA's GPUs are the market leader for both training and inference, and that such versatility was a key appeal of the product. But over the last year, demand for advanced computing has shifted from training to inference as companies deploy AI agents and other tools that they hope will upend hundreds of industries and generate enormous profits from subscription fees. Agents are AI systems that act relatively autonomously to carry out tasks on behalf of users. Okay, our next article is entitled OpenAI Deal Secures $110 billion in Funding. This article is written by Kate Clark. OpenAI has secured commitments totaling $110 billion in new funding, the company said. The deal, which values the company at $730 billion before the investment, shows investor appetite for the ChatGPT developer remains strong ahead of an expected initial public offering later this year, and reasserts OpenAI's position in the increasingly competitive market. The financing includes a $30 billion investment from SoftBank and a $50 billion commitment from Amazon. Amazon will invest an initial $15 billion into the company, followed by $35 billion contingent on certain milestones. As part of the Amazon deal, OpenAI will buy billions of dollars worth of Amazon's artificial intelligence chips. It plans to use the Trainium chips for its new enterprise offering called Frontier. The deal marks a pivot for OpenAI, which has historically leaned on Microsoft's Azure Cloud and NVIDIA's GPUs. In a separate blog post, OpenAI said its long-running partnership with Microsoft, quote, remains strong and central, unquote. In a joint interview Friday on CNBC's Squawk Box with Amazon Chief Executive Andy Jassy, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman said the new investment gives them a, quote, very long runway to expand the business. We are all going to be surprised about the amount of AI progress the field sees this year, probably every year after that, Altman said. It does feel like we are making faster progress than even I expected. Jassy said that Amazon continues to work closely with Anthropic and that OpenAI is, quote, off to an amazing start, unquote. They are going to be one of the very big winners, we believe, long term, Jassy said. OpenAI's fundraising also includes $30 billion from NVIDIA after the chipmaker's earlier plan to invest as much as $100 billion stalled when some inside the tech giant raised concerns about the deal. The Wall Street Journal previously reported OpenAI said additional investors are expected to join the funding round. The company also announced that weekly users of its AI coding tool, Codex, have reached 1.6 million, more than tripling since the beginning of the year. Altman said on CNBC that Codex growth has been significant, with usage increasing about 37% in the past week. The Wall Street Journal's parent company, News Corp, has a content deal with OpenAI. Our next article is entitled Pakistan Calls Conflict with Afghans, quote, open war. Quote, patience has run out over Taliban attacks, says Pakistan's defense minister. This article is written by Shan Lee and Waqar Gilani. A long conflict between Pakistan and Afghanistan's Taliban regime has turned into what Pakistan declared Friday to be, quote, open war, unquote, with attacks reported in Kabul and along their shared border. Quote, our patience has run out and now there is an open war between us, unquote, Defense Minister Khawaja Mohammad Asif said in a social media post. Pakistan has been pressing Taliban authorities in Kabul to stop what it says are attacks by Afghan forces and the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, or Pakistani Taliban, a militant group based across the border. Pakistani security forces said they responded in full force to recent attacks, striking Taliban border posts and hideouts in Afghanistan and hitting targets in Kabul. A spokesman for the Taliban government in Afghanistan said Pakistan carried out airstrikes in Kabul, Kandahar, and Paktia, a southeastern province that borders Pakistan. Pakistan declared a high alert in major cities, warning of possible suicide attacks. Pakistan hasn't formally declared war, but is escalating its rhetoric to stress the depth of its frustration with the Taliban government, says Hussain Haqqani, senior fellow at the Hudson Institute and a former Pakistan ambassador to the U.S. Quote, this is definitely an escalation, he said. There has been fighting between the two without anybody saying that it is war, unquote. After the Taliban took over Afghanistan in 2021, Islamabad assumed it would have influence in the country, but Kabul has worked to deepen ties with Pakistan's rival, India. In January, Afghanistan appointed its first diplomatic envoy to India since the Taliban takeover, deepening frustrations in Islamabad. Tensions have flared between the two countries in recent years as Islamabad accused Kabul of harboring Pakistani militants, blaming them for attacks in Pakistan. Afghanistan has denied those allegations. Pakistan launched airstrikes this past week on what is described as militant camps within Afghanistan. Those attacks were the most extensive since October, when the countries engaged in weeks of deadly border clashes that erupted after Pakistan launched airstrikes in Kabul. Pakistan security officials said those airstrikes were targeting the head of the Pakistani Taliban. Dozens of civilians and soldiers have been killed in cross-border attacks launched by both sides. The two countries agreed to a ceasefire brokered by Qatar and Turkey, but further peace talks ended without a long-term deal. Pakistan Army spokesman Lieutenant General Ahmad Sharif Chaudhry said Friday that 12 Pakistani soldiers died in the latest fighting. Pakistan hit about 24 military targets, killing 274 Taliban, figures that couldn't be independently confirmed, he said. Haqqani said he doesn't see a full-blown war erupting. Islamabad likely will engage in more border fighting and airstrikes, while Kabul could launch more attacks within Pakistan, he said. Quote, I can visualize the Taliban leaders putting themselves into a more warlike posture, unquote. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, we're going on to a little lighter article here. It's entitled, Could the Fastest Man on Skates Be Better on a Bike? This article is written by Jason Gay. The pro cycling world wonders if Jordan Stolz could transfer his brilliance to the road. Jordan Stolz was Team USA's breakout star at the Milan Cortina Olympics. The speed skating Wisconsin wonderkid who won 2 gold medals. Stolz's redwood thighs punished the field in Milan, shattering Olympic records and Dutch dreams. It's also prompted my kind of sports gossip about how good the 21-year-old might be if he switched to another sport, pro cycling. Yes, that's right, folks. It was the Winter Olympics, and I found a way to make it about bikes. This is real speculation, however. Stolz is a committed cyclist. Like a lot of skaters, he uses the bike to train long hours in the off-season to build endurance. Bikes are a staple at Olympic rinks as skaters use them to warm up, cool down, and get some easy miles done. The two sports have a history of cross-pollination. Speed skating and cycling demand serious power and intense efforts. They require a tolerance for suffering, and European hotels with tiny beds. You're already accustomed to walking around in public in tight synthetic clothing. There's precedent for skaters migrating from the ice to the road. Most famously, there's the speed skating GOAT, Eric Heiden, the Lake Placid legend who helped launch the fabulously outfitted 7-Eleven team in the 1980s, won a U.S. national title, finished the Giro d'Italia, and actually made it to the Tour de France. Heiden thinks Stolz would be a fascinating pro cycling prospect. Quote, I think he could do it, he said. He's certainly got the physical abilities, unquote. Stolz isn't waving off the idea. If anything, he's fanning it, talking about the possibility of testing himself against cycling idols like 4-time Tour champ Tadej Pogacar. Quote, I wouldn't mind trying it, unquote, Stolz told the Journal's Robert O'Connell after capturing his second gold in the men's 500 meters. Quote, I think I could do well on a flat stage, unquote. Stirring the pot even more, Stolz did an interview around last summer's Tour de France in which he stated his top-end power. His generated output, measured in watts, reached 2,100 to 2,300 watts. That's an eye-popping number that would eclipse the max power generated by Pogacar and the world's best cycling sprinters. Not surprisingly, Stoltz's interest, and especially those wild wattage numbers, has piqued the curiosity of cycling bosses. Quote, if Olympic sport had a transfer portal, we'd have already signed him, unquote, cracked USA Cycling CEO and President Brendan Quirk. Quirk elaborated, he is a generational athlete and the physiological transfer would be almost automatic. The aerobic engine, power production, and efficiency under load translate exceptionally well, and psychologically, he has already proven he is a world-class competitor with a rare tolerance for discomfort and an ability to execute under pressure, unquote. Yes, all of that, what Quirk said. There's also the lure of additional income. Cycling has a global reach, and while it is hardly a lucrative job for the grunt roller, the biggest names can make millions. Jonathan Vaughters, the man behind EF Pro Cycling, the US-born team that competes in the Tour, told me he definitely, quote, think about, unquote, Stoltz as an outside prospect. The pink-kitted team has explored the possibility with speed skaters before, he said. Stoltz, who is listed at 6'1", 180 pounds, would be on the large side for a pro rider and might have trouble hanging in with the featherweights in the mountains. He'd probably be slotted in as a sprinting one-day racer type, the domains dominated by big dogs with giant engines. That's what Stoltz thinks, too. Quote, I would like to go single-day sprint, unquote, he told O'Connell. Quote, I think stage races are too long. It's too exhausting, unquote. At the highest possible end, a comparable would be Mathieu van der Poel, the Dutch Terminator who has won Tour stages, one-day classics like Paris, Roubaix, and turns up for races in a Lamborghini. Van der Poel is considered Gronkowski huge for cycling, but at 6 feet, 165 pounds, he's actually a tad smaller than Stoltz. Quote, yes, I know my fellow bike nerds are going to come after me for mentioning Stoltz in the same breath as the beloved MVDP, but I'm just trying to say what kind of rider he might resemble. Give me a break, my nerds. It may never happen, of course. Stoltz is already a speed skating giant who's a celebrity in Holland, and his Olympic greatness will only raise his global profile and earning potential. But if he wanted to try the bike, Christian Vande Velde, the former pro cyclist who works for NBC, enthused at the possibility. Vande Velde agreed that the peloton would be a challenge, banging bars at 60 kilometers per hour in the last 5K. No thank you. But he couldn't help but wonder how Stoltz would fare. Quote, it's not easy for anyone to cross over late, he said, but I'm here for it, unquote. I'm a slow, biased bike nerd, but I agree. Give it a shot, Jordan. Cycling's a beautiful sport. Crazy, but beautiful. Think of the glory. Think of the sunshine. Think of all the new spandex. Cross over to the dork side. All right, our next article is entitled, Why Are My Peers Silent About Iran's Atrocities? Our parents marched in the 1979 revolution. They learned the hard way about the dangers of groupthink. This article is written by Dina Nairi. In 7 decades of boldness and risk-taking, my mother's single greatest regret is marching for the 1979 revolution in Iran. She was a 23-year-old medical student, newly married and pregnant for the first time. When the protests broke out to oust the Shah, she showed up for her community, a tight-knit cluster of graduate students who were frustrated by his extravagance and tyranny. And though she'd spent the 70s in fashionable bell-bottoms and unveiled with a stylish haircut, she put on a chador to support her cohort again, this time for the demonstrations that threw open Iran's doors to the corrupt, murderous Islamic Republic. In the 1960s and 70s, a secular Iran was thriving artistically and culturally. At the Shah's insistence, the country was westernizing and modernizing, an exciting or frightening prospect depending on who you were. But the Shah was a problematic figure, obscene in his displays of wealth and ruthless in his suppression of dissent. He became a symbol of Western decadence, income disparity, amoral living, and kowtowing to Western interests. Though each of Iran's scattered factions wanted something different, they began to unite in their desire to get rid of him. My mother's cluster were moralists, conservative, sheltered children of university-educated parents who believed in God, marriage, and study. They weren't necessarily hijab-wearing conservatives or even Muslims. My mother was Muslim, but her closest friends were Baha'i and Jewish. But they were worried about permissive Western ideas changing Iran. To them, Westoxification meant the end of modesty. Playboys on newsstands, naked women on television, individuality over community, and the erosion of thousands of years of Iranian culture and morality. Then there were the Marxists, including the Tudeh Party, who wanted to shake off the capitalist Western influences and move toward communism, and an overlapping circle of liberals and intellectuals who wanted to restore the 1906 Constitution with free elections and civil liberties. The oldest of these had, in interviews and speeches, that women would have even witnessed the CIA-backed 1953 coup that overthrew the popular Prime Minister Mossadegh, who had nationalized the oil industry in favor of a more controllable Shah. In the background were ordinary people like my rule-born father, a vast population of along-getters and pleasure seekers who just wanted to live. They didn't organize or worry too much about cultural change. What angered them was that their family struggled for basic needs while the Shah fattened himself on the people's oil. Of these culturally Muslim rural working classes, often credited with wanting a theocracy, my mother says, quote, they just wanted someone to give them their rights. The only thing that united them was basic human needs, unquote. One faction that did want a theocracy, though, were the radical Islamists, who, with their unkempt beards and disdain for music and art, looked and behaved very little like most of the 1970s Iran. Their leader, the Ayatollah Khomeini, was exiled in France and shrouded in mystery. Nowadays, my mother says a Google search can tell you more in a minute about Ayatollah Khomeini's ideology than the entire population knew at that time. So how did the clerics hijack the People's Revolution from everyone else? I know it sounds strange to say that the revolution wasn't about Islam, that the Iranian people were then, as they are now, religiously diverse, largely secular and with an ancient artistic intellectual heritage rooted in Zoroastrianism. If I had to describe every Iranian in one blanket cultural statement, I'd say an Iranian is a melodramatic poet biologically incapable of walking away from food, music, or a party. To these ordinary folks, the Ayatollah Khomeini made sweeping promises that the poor, religious, minorities, and women would be better off under his rule. He even claimed more rights than men. The clerics then convinced the desperate political factions that to achieve this utopia, they would need to categorize themselves under a single ideology. Out with the Shah and his Western allegiances. Iranian resources would be for Iranians. But for the revolution to work and these shared economic goals to materialize, everyone would have to accept the entire ideological package. So when the Ayatollah called women delicate flowers that must be protected from male concerns, my mother and her friends ignored their distaste, and they ignored warnings from their parents and professors too. You were either in or you were out, and if you were out, you were siding with Western imperialists. The tactic worked. The Shah boarded a plane, scooping a fistful of Iranian dirt on his way out. Ayatollah Khomeini, the cleric who had promised everyone everything, arrived on a Western jet from Paris. We should have known, my mother says, because what exile returns on a fancy jet from France? Immediately upon gaining power, the Islamic Republic murdered the leaders of the factions who had paved its way, publishing gory photographs of their deaths in national magazines. And barely 2 years into the new regime, my mother and her friends were mourning their blind involvement. Quote, "It was a mistake," my mother says. "We didn't want a religious government. They promised us something else," unquote. She adds a warning. Quote, "If a group ever asks you to agree with them on everything, it's a cult," unquote. The cultish dynamic would come up again throughout my life as I moved from Oklahoma to university and beyond. In each new community, my friends and colleagues clustered around a few core beliefs and accepted everything that felt roughly aligned with those values, relying on their community to arbitrate an array of issues for them. Now in 2026, the Islamic Republic is benefiting from this tendency, quashing the People's Revolution, just as it did in 1979. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. When I was 10 years old, my mother, now an outspoken Christian convert, was granted U.S. asylum and sent to Oklahoma with me and my brother in tow. We joined a Christian community where we were often asked to share a story in local churches. We spoke about how Jesus had chosen us, rescued us, the dangers we'd escaped. We left out the parts that didn't fit the immigrant narrative, that we missed Iran, that the Muslims we knew weren't militant, that our culture was ancient, rich, and varied. Nobody seemed as interested in those. Growing up in the Bible Belt, I took great solace in promises of God's protection, His plans for my life. But as I entered my teenage years, I started to deviate from certain aspects of the faith. I felt constantly at war with my new community. When the Ayatollah called women delicate flowers to be protected from male concerns, my mother and her friends ignored their distaste. Communities teachings about woman, gender, and marriage, that men were the head of the family and women should submit to their husbands. But when I spoke up, our church leaders insisted that you can't pick and choose from the Bible, that the Word of God is not a handbook of suggestions, and that cherry-picking your beliefs makes you a Christian in name only. Eventually, I left for a university where I found my own tribe of bookish girls. I experimented with versions of myself, and slowly I found my voice as a liberal woman, and later as a writer and advocate for refugees. By my 30s, I was comfortably situated in yet another trusted cohort, supporting my activist friends on things we all cared about: reproductive rights, wrongful convictions, freedom for Palestine. But I couldn't research everything. I believed that we all cared about the same things: climate stability, freedom, safety, justice, basic human rights, and dignity for everyone. So if the group planted a flag on a faraway issue, I could probably go with it. At no time did it occur to me that this was the precise behavior I had judged in the 70s Iranian activists and 90s Southern evangelicals. I first noticed a shift in the progressive reaction to Iran in the late 2010s. Between 2017 and 2020, I published several essays and a memoir about my mother's imprisonment and our escape from the Islamic Republic and the displacement that followed. I received hundreds of messages from readers, some I expected, anti-immigrant rants, of course, and support from allies and fellow immigrants. But there was a confusing third category that seemed to come from otherwise liberal, native-born Americans. The discourse around Islamophobia had swelled and became dangerously binary in the wake of the Muslim ban, and now I heard comments like, quote, "Well, it's a Muslim country and your mother broke the law," unquote. Again and again, I encountered the casual claim that a majority of Iranians wanted to live under Sharia law and that any criticism of repressive laws like forcible hijab equals religious bigotry. Free American women allowed themselves to say this to me, an Iranian who spent 3 years under forced hijab in an Islamic Republic school. One academic asked me flat out, if I loved Iran so much, why was I bad-mouthing it? In a single flippant remark, she confused Iran with the Islamic Republic. Very different. My memoir with rhetoric. I was just telling my story. Forced migration with disloyalty. We were forced to leave. And a hatred of murderers with hatred of the country and faith they'd hijacked. I dismiss these misguided reactions and the silly underlying implication that any criticism of a cleric regime puts all Muslims in an unflattering light. But in 2022, when the Morali police killed 22-year-old Masha Amini for refusing to wear a hijab and the woman life freedom protest kicked off, the support from my cohort felt even more tepid and reluctant. Later in fall 2023, after the October 7th attacks, that support dried up. Since then, every reputable newspaper has documented authenticated photos and videos of the regime's atrocities. Hundreds of protesters, including children, have been killed, thousands imprisoned and tortured since 2022, dozens executed after sham trials. The European Union has designated Iran's Revolutionary Guard a terrorist organization. As a woman who spent her first 8 years trembling under the regime's eye, berated by teachers and made to chant hateful slogans in the schoolyard, I'm baffled by this moral inconsistency. We are rightfully outraged by the brutality of ICE. but Iran's mortality police have brutalized citizens in even worse ways for nearly half a century. We're disgusted by the Epstein files, but in Iran, girls as young as 7 are forced to marry old men. There's no need for secret files. And the Islamic Republic has shot, hanged, or otherwise murdered thousands of innocents, including minors. Since December, I feel the old loneliness returning. I am an American and Iranian, a progressive feminist, a humanitarian. I believe in liberal values. I'm also trying to form opinions more thoughtfully, and here's where I've landed. I find it racist to believe that while you're sophisticated enough to need democracy, Iranians are not. We all want the same things: our share of our land's resources, a voice in governance, and the freedom to thrive according to our nature. Nobody, Muslim or Christian or Baha'i or atheist, wants to be stuck under the crushing rule of somebody else's God. And I get it. We can't expect everyone to research every issue or mobilize for every fight. Often we decide at the outset, I'm humanitarian or I'm a conservative Christian, and we accept our group's handbook, assuming that each opinion has been vetted by experts and that will be generally right most of the time. But sometimes our communities get it wrong. Humanitarians might miss an atrocity. Feminists might overlook sexism. We make compromises and alliances and mistakes, and that's okay. But it takes intellectual humility, curiosity, and bravery to correct those mistakes and to stray from the herd toward a messy and complicated truth. The author, Dina Nayeri, is the author of The Ungrateful Refugee, published in 2019. Also, Who Gets Believed, published in 2023, and A Happy Death, published in 2027. The Shah's obscene display of wealth and ruthless suppression of dissent were seen as problematic by many Iranians. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the February 28th issue of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition. We read from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition every Monday at 7 a.m. Your reader has been Dave Payne. Thank you for listening.
You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Volunteer radio readers broadcast daily readings, 24 hours a day, of newspapers, magazines, books, and other printed matter to area people who are blind or have a print disability, who are provided reading radios. The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service has broadcast almost 40 years of radio readings to those without sight. Our broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNED. Radio Reading Studios are at 1199 Harlem Road in Cheektowaga. For more information on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, call 716-821-5555. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability.